She pushed a 5-year-old off a chair at Easter dinner. My sister, the woman my entire family had spent 30 years calling the golden child, the successful one, the one who had made it, pushed a 5-year-old off a chair at Easter dinner. Not an accident, not a stumble, a deliberate, full-handed push in front of the entire family. And my parents? They looked at the rug. My father muttered something about the food getting cold. My mother reached over and touched my sister's arm, not to scold her, to comfort her, over a dress. Nobody looked at my daughter. Nobody asked if she was okay. And in that moment, with my child crying in my arms, and my entire family pretending they hadn't just watched something unforgivable happen, I made a decision. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for an apology. I picked up my daughter. I walked out the front door, and I made one phone call. "I'll sign the deal," I said, my voice completely calm. "On one condition." The man on the other end of the line, my chief legal officer, said nothing, waiting. "Fire Serena?" There was a pause. "Serena, as in the CEO? The one whose company we're acquiring?" "Yes," I said. "Effective immediately after signing. Drafted into the contract." And that was it. That was how my sister lost everything. Not in a courtroom, not in a scandal, not in some dramatic confrontation. In a single sentence, spoken quietly, by the sister she'd spent 30 years calling a failure. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand why that Easter dinner broke something permanent inside me, you need to understand what came before it. My name is Adrienne, and I have spent my entire adult life being the invisible daughter. Growing up in the Whitmore household meant one thing above everything else. Serena was the star, and everyone else existed to orbit around her. My sister was 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand what attention looked like, I understood that it was never going to be equally distributed in our house. Serena was the kind of girl who walked into a room and made it rearrange itself around her. She was beautiful in that sharp, deliberate way, the kind of beautiful that knew exactly what it was doing. She was loud, confident, and academically sharp enough that every teacher she ever had wrote glowing letters about her potential. Our parents adored her completely. I was quieter, more internal. I didn't fight for the spotlight because I was too busy reading, thinking, building things in my head. I wasn't the kind of child who announced her ambitions. I just worked on them, alone, in silence. And silence, I learned early, is something a family like mine mistakes for failure. By the time I graduated college, with honors on a full academic scholarship, a fact my parents managed to mention exactly once, Serena had already landed a mid-level position at a financial firm in the city. She talked about it constantly at dinners. She dressed the part. She made sure everyone around her understood that she was going places. I got a job at a small tech startup that most people had never heard of. My parents nodded politely when I told them. Then they turned back to Serena and asked about her upcoming work trip to New York. That was the pattern. Over the next decade, I worked. I failed at some things. I pivoted. I built something quietly and carefully, the way I had always done everything. Serena climbed the corporate ladder with the kind of aggressive visibility that earns promotions quickly, but doesn't always earn trust. By her late 30s, she had positioned herself as the CEO of a mid-sized firm called Crestline Ventures, a consulting and acquisitions company with a solid enough reputation and a client list she loved to drop into conversations. She talked about Crestline the way some people talk about their children. I understood that. In a way, it was her child. What she didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that 3 years earlier, I had quietly become the founder and majority stakeholder of a holding group called Titan Capital. We didn't advertise. We didn't attend galas. We acquired, restructured, and grew with zero fanfare, which is exactly how I wanted it. My identity as the company's CEO was not public knowledge. By choice. Deliberately. Because I had learned from 30 years of living in my family's shadow that the most powerful thing in the world is being underestimated. I had a daughter, Chloe. She was 5 years old, small for her age, with her father's eyes and my stubbornness, a combination I found endlessly charming. Her father and I had separated amicably 2 years prior, and while we co-parented well, It was largely just the two of us, Chloe and me. A quiet, warm life that I had built deliberately, away from the noise of my family's opinions. I went to the family gatherings because I believed, for longer than I should have, that family was still family. Easter dinner, that was the one that finally taught me otherwise. The Whitmore family Easter dinner was always held at my parents' house, a large, well-decorated home in a suburb outside the city that my parents maintained as a kind of stage set for the life they wanted people to believe they lived. The dining table was set formally, which was a signal to everyone that this was a performance, not a meal. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins folded into shapes, my mother's good china, which came out exactly 3 times a year. I arrived with Chloe on my hip, a bottle of wine in my bag, and the quiet, practiced armor I always wore to these gatherings. The kind that lets things roll off the surface while you keep your interior completely still. Serena was already there. Of course she was. She was positioned at the center of the table, not at the head, which was technically my father's seat, but in the spot that functioned as the emotional center of the room. She was dressed in a deep crimson silk outfit that I later learned cost several $1,000s, though at the time I simply noted that it was eye-catching and that she knew it. She was holding a glass of red wine and speaking in that particular voice she used for stories about work. Slightly louder than necessary, rich with implication that she was someone worth listening to. And the acquisition is basically a done deal, she was saying as I walked in. Titan Capital is this anonymous holding group. Nobody really knows who's behind it. Very secretive operation. But their legal team reached out to us last month. They want Crestline. The offer is significant. She paused to let that land. My mother made an appropriate sound of admiration. My attorneys are finalizing the terms, Serena continued. It's going to be the defining moment for Crestline. Honestly, this is what I've been building toward for 10 years. I set Chloe down beside me and began unwrapping her little jacket. I said nothing. I had known about Serena's company for over a year. I had, in fact, been in quiet discussions with my own legal team about whether Crestline Ventures was worth acquiring, and the answer had come back complicated. The company had potential, but had been financially mismanaged. Serena was a strong external-facing CEO, but a poor operational leader. She inspired confidence in clients, but the interior infrastructure of her company was quietly deteriorating. My team had recommended the acquisition as a restructuring play. I had agreed, pending a review of final terms. I had not, in any way, connected this to my family. Business was business. I did not let those two worlds touch. But sitting at that table, watching Serena perform her triumph for an audience that included me, the anonymous buyer she was so excited about, I felt something that I can only describe as a particular kind of tired. The kind of tired that comes from years of being unseen by people who should have been looking. Dinner began. Chloe was well behaved, as she always was in unfamiliar social settings. Quiet, observant, careful with her movements. She sat beside me, her small legs not quite reaching the floor, drinking water and watching the adults with the concentrated attention of a child who has learned that grown-up conversations are mostly for listening to. It was during a story, another one of Serena's stories, this one about a conference she had attended in San Francisco, that it happened. Serena was gesturing broadly. She had that habit when she was deep in a narrative. Her arms would extend, her hands would move, as though she were physically sculpting the story in the air. The water pitcher was on the table between us. Her sleeve caught it. Cold water flooded across the table. A significant portion of it hit Serena's lap, soaking into the crimson silk. For a single moment there was silence. Then Serena screamed. Not a gasp, not a startled exclamation, a full-throated scream. And she turned immediately to face the nearest small person at the table. Which was Chloe. "You little brat!" she snapped. "Serena," I started. But she was already moving. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, and I have replayed it in my mind hundreds of times since. Serena pushed back her chair, reached across, and pushed my daughter. Not nudged, not brushed past. A deliberate, forceful push, the kind that sends a small child off balance completely. Chloe was 5 years old and small. She went sideways off the chair and hit the hardwood floor. The sound she made when she landed, That sharp, stunned cry of a child who doesn't yet understand what just happened to them, is the sound I hear when I want to remember exactly why I did what I did next. I was on the floor beside her in an instant. She was shaking and crying and looking at me with this expression, this absolutely heartbroken, bewildered expression, like she was asking me to explain how this could have happened. I held her. I looked up at my sister. "Serena, she is 5 years old. My dress is ruined." Serena's voice was shrill, indignant, the voice of someone who genuinely could not understand why anyone was looking anywhere but at her. "Do you know what this costs? You and your kid have been nothing but a burden since you walked through that door. You're both exactly what you've always been, a drain on everyone around you." I looked at my parents. My father was looking at the water on the rug. My mother was looking at Serena, not in outrage, not in reprimand, with that particular soft concern she reserved for Serena's moments of distress. "The food is getting cold," my mother said, to no one in particular. My father cleared his throat. "Adrian, maybe take the girl to the kitchen so she can settle down. She's disrupting the dinner." Disrupting the dinner, those 3 words. I looked around that table, at my father, at my mother, at the aunt who was suddenly very interested in her fork, at the cousin who had developed an urgent need to check something on his phone. Not one of them looked at my daughter crying after being hurt. Not one. I stood up slowly. I held my daughter against my chest. I could feel her shaking slow as she pressed her face into my neck, the way she always did when she was overwhelmed. I looked at Serena. She was blotting her dress with a cloth napkin, scowling. "You're right," I said. My voice had gone to that place it goes when I'm past the point of anger, past the point of anything that resembles performance, the still place, the quiet place. I am done being a drain. Serena didn't even look up. I picked up my bag. I buckled Chloe's jacket with one hand, with her still on my hip. I walked to the front door. My mother said, "Adrian, don't be dramatic." I closed the door behind me. I sat in my car in the driveway for exactly 4 minutes. Chloe had stopped crying. She was leaning against my arm, exhausted in the way children get after emotional overwhelm. That sudden, heavy stillness. I kissed the top of her head. Then I picked up my phone and called my chief legal officer, a man named Patrick, who had been with Titan Capital from the beginning, and who understood implicitly that when I called on a Sunday, something had shifted. He picked up on the second ring. "Adrian." "The Crestline deal," I said. A brief pause. "I thought you wanted to finalize terms Tuesday." "I want to finalize tonight. Draft the closing documents." "Tonight? Adrian, it's Easter Sunday." "I'm aware. I also want an amendment added to the terms." "What kind of amendment?" "Leadership transition. Effective immediately upon close, the current CEO is removed from all positions. Board, advisory, operational. Full separation. Non-negotiable clause. If Crestline's representatives push back on the term, we withdraw the offer entirely." Another pause, longer this time. "You want to fire her," Patrick said carefully, "as a condition of the deal." "Yes." "Adrian." He clearly wanted to ask more, and also clearly understood that I would tell him exactly what I wanted to tell him and nothing more. "Understood. I'll have the amendment drafted within the hour." "Good." I put the phone in my lap. Chloe looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Mommy okay?" she asked. I smoothed her hair back from her face gently. "Mommy is very okay," I told her. "We're going to go home and have hot chocolate and watch that movie you like, and tomorrow is going to be a completely normal day. All right?" She nodded, satisfied with that. I started the car. The next 48 hours moved the way significant things do when they've been long in the making. Not slowly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, inevitable momentum of something that has been building for a long time and simply needed a final signal to begin. Patrick had the amended acquisition agreement finalized by Monday morning. By 9 a.m., Crestline Ventures board had received the offer documents, the same offer Serena had been celebrating at dinner the night before, the deal she had called the defining moment of her decade of work. The terms were largely unchanged from what had been under discussion. with one addition. The new clause was worded in clean legal language, as these things always are, but its meaning was simple and absolute. Acquisition was contingent upon the immediate and permanent departure of the current chief executive. No transition period, no advisory role, no severance negotiation built into the buyer's commitment. A clean separation, handled by Crestline's own board according to their internal protocols. The board's attorney called Patrick within 20 minutes of receiving the documents. Patrick called me. "They want to understand the rationale," he said. "The rationale is that Titan Capital's restructuring model requires installing our own operational leadership upon close. That is a standard practice and entirely defensible." "They're going to tell her." "I know. She's going to figure out who the buyer is." "She might," I said. "That's fine." He paused. "You're sure about this?" "Patrick, how long have you worked with me?" 7 years. "Have I ever asked you that question before?" "No." "Then trust that I know what I'm doing." Serena called me at 11:14 a.m. I watched the phone ring. She had not called me in 4 months. Before that, we had exchanged perhaps a dozen texts over the course of a year. Perfunctory things, logistical things, the kind of communication that exists to maintain the appearance of a relationship without actually sustaining one. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I answered. "Adrian." Her voice was different from the dinner table. It had lost the glossy confidence, and underneath it was something raw, something that might have moved me once. "Adrian, I need you to tell me something is going on that I don't understand, because my board is telling me that the acquisition of my company is contingent on me being removed, and I need someone to explain to me what is happening." I was quiet for a moment. "Your board is telling you the truth," I said. "What does that mean? Do you know something? Do you have a contact at Titan Capital? Can you—" "Adrian, I know we had a rough night last night. I know things got out of hand. But you have to understand that my whole company is—" "Serena." She stopped. "Titan Capital is my company," I said. "It has been for 9 years. I am the one who made the offer on Crestline, and I am the one who added the term about leadership transition." The silence that followed was the longest I'd ever heard from my sister. "You," she said finally, just that word. "Yes." You're the anonymous—" Her voice cracked, and I heard something beneath the crack that I recognized as the specific disbelief of someone whose entire framework of a person has just collapsed. "That's not possible. You work in tech. You have that small—" "I founded Titan Capital in 2017, I said. "We have acquired 23 companies. I have deliberately kept my name out of public filings, which I'm sure is something you understand now." Another silence. Then slowly the disbelief in her voice gave way to something else. The beginning of an argument she was trying to build. "Adrian, listen to me. Whatever happened at dinner, I had too much wine. Things escalated. I didn't mean—" "Serena," I said, "this isn't about dinner." "Then what?" "This is about 9 years of me sitting at that table while you performed your success for a family that was never once going to look in my direction. This is about our parents telling me to take my daughter to the kitchen so she wouldn't disrupt your story. This is about a 5-year-old child crying after being hurt, and not a single person at that table asking if she was okay." My voice stayed level the entire time. That was important to me. "The deal terms are final," I said. "The board will make their decision. That is between you and them. I have no interest in inserting myself into that conversation. I just want you to know the answer to your question. Yes, it's me. It's always been me. And I'm no longer interested in pretending otherwise." I ended the call. Crestline's board accepted the acquisition terms by 3 p.m. that same day. They had little choice. The offer was strong, the company needed the capital infusion, and the alternative was a continued financial deterioration that their internal projections had been quietly flagging for 2 years. The investor appetite for an independent Crestline was diminishing. Titan's offer was, by any objective measure, their best viable path. Serena was officially separated from Crestline Ventures by end of business Tuesday. She received the standard separation terms her own employment contract entitled her to. Not a penny more. Not from me, my parents called. My father, in a voice I had never quite heard from him before, a voice with edges of something that might have been discomfort or might have been the earliest recognizable shape of accountability, said that perhaps things had gone further than intended on Easter. I thanked him for saying so. I told him that Chloe had taken several days to feel completely like herself again. He was quiet. My mother called separately and used the word misunderstanding 4 times in 6 minutes, which was when I told her gently that I needed to go and that I would reach out when I was ready. I have not reached out yet. 3 months after Easter dinner, Titan Capital completed the formal restructuring of what had been Kreslin Ventures. We brought in a new operational CEO, a woman named Rachel who had run 2 previous turnarounds and who had the rare combination of financial precision and genuine people leadership that Kreslin's team had been working without for years. Within her first 60 days, retention among Kreslin's core staff improved measurably. 3 client contracts that had been stalling were finalized. I visited the office once, unannounced, to walk through the floor. Nobody knew who I was. I preferred it that way. I tell you this story not because I want you to be proud of me for what I did to my sister. I want to be honest with you. There is no clean resolution here. No moment where everything became simple. Serena lost her company. She had built it over a decade, and whatever her failures as a person, that work was real. That loss was real. I chose to make it happen, and I would make the same choice again, because the moment I have to rationalize my way back to a table where my child was treated terribly and ignored is the moment I have failed her. But I do not celebrate it. What I celebrate is something smaller and more ordinary. Chloe, on a Thursday in June, was sitting at our kitchen table drawing something. One of those complicated, joyful drawings that children make where a house has 7 windows and the sun has a face and there are flowers growing at impractical heights. She was narrating quietly to herself as she drew, the way she does when she doesn't know I'm listening. "And this is Mommy's work," she said, drawing a large building with great concentration. "And Mommy is the boss, and nobody tells Mommy to be quiet." I stood in the doorway for a long moment. "That's right," I said. "Nobody tells Mommy to be quiet." She looked up, delighted to have been overheard. "You're the boss," she confirmed. "I am." She went back to her drawing, satisfied. And that small, sunlit, completely ordinary moment, is the thing I come back to when I think about why any of it was worth it. Not the acquisition. Not the clause in a legal document. Not the phone call I overheard my sister make, or the silence from my parents, or any of the things that might look like victory from the outside. Just my daughter, at the kitchen table, drawing a building, and knowing, without question, without doubt, that her mother is someone who cannot be made small. Here's the thing I want to leave you with. The people who call you a failure are often the people who simply cannot see what you're building, because what you're building doesn't look the way they expect success to look. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. Choosing not to announce yourself is not the same as having nothing to announce. Adrienne didn't fight for her seat at the table. She bought the table. And then she walked away from it anyway, because she understood something her family never did. The most powerful thing you can do for yourself is decide, quietly and without drama, that you are no longer available for certain kinds of treatment. Not because you're bitter, because you know what you're worth. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to think about it. Have you ever been in a room full of people who should have had your back, and watched every single one of them look away? What did you do? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, Velyra payback. We're here every day with new stories. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.